The cold marble floors of Harrington Enterprises still carried that same haunting stillness I had memorized as a little girl. Walking back through those glass doors after 6 long years felt like touching a wound that never fully healed, like standing inside a memory that refused to let me go. I smoothed the collar of my charcoal blazer and took a slow breath. Nobody here knew what I had become. When my father first brought home Vivian Harrington and her son Ethan, I was just 17, wide-eyed and hoping for a family. What I got instead was a front-row seat to my own quiet erasure. Now I was 33, and my name was no longer Nadia Reeves, the grieving stepdaughter who got pushed out the door. Today I was walking back in as someone they never saw coming. "Ms. Reeves?" The front desk attendant blinked, running her finger down the printed sheet in front of her. "I don't seem to have you listed for the annual shareholders meeting this morning." I smiled, calm and unhurried. "Look again, my name should be there." Ethan's voice sliced through the lobby before I even turned around, smooth and dripping with the same entitlement that had followed him since boarding school. Well, he came to a stop a few feet away, taking in my appearance with that particular smirk he'd spent years perfecting. I didn't think today could get more entertaining. He looked every bit the polished air, tailored suit, not a hair out of place, confidence borrowed from a name he had done nothing to earn. "Nadia." He said it like a punchline. "Are you here to ask for a reference? Because I have to say, the timing is a little awkward." The words landed exactly as he intended, dragging up the memory of the day he had me escorted from this very building 6 years ago. My father hadn't even been in the ground 2 weeks. Restructuring, Ethan had told HR. Everyone understood what it actually meant. The stepdaughter was no longer useful. "Actually," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even, "I'm here for the meeting." He let out a short laugh, the kind designed to make you feel small in front of an audience. "The shareholder meeting? Nadia, that's genuinely precious. That room is for owners, not hopeful visitors. Why don't you go build whatever little project you've been hiding in and leave the real business to people who belong here?" He stepped sideways to block the elevator, casual and deliberate all at once. If he had known what I had spent those 6 years quietly building, piece by piece, he would not have been laughing. While he and Vivian assumed I was struggling somewhere in the background, I had been executing every step of the plan my father had mapped out long before his heart gave out. "Mr. Harrington," the receptionist said carefully, her voice dropping just slightly, "there is actually a listing. It was just updated. Miss Reeves is registered as—" "That's not possible," Ethan cut her off sharply. "Every name on that list comes through me personally. This is a closed event for major shareholders only." I reached into my bag and opened an email on my phone, holding it loosely at my side. "Since you brought up shareholders," I said, "have you pulled up the ownership registry this morning?" Something shifted behind his eyes, just a flicker, but I caught it. "What are you talking about?" "I think we should take this conversation upstairs," I said pleasantly. "The board has been waiting long enough." "This is ridiculous." He planted himself more firmly in front of the elevator. "Security." The elevator doors parted, and Vivian stepped out, her expression curdling the moment she saw me. She had aged into her cruelty beautifully, every line on her face a testament to years of calculated control. "What is she doing in this building?" "I'm handling it, Mother," Ethan said, though the certainty in his voice had thinned. I glanced at my watch. It's 9:57. The meeting begins in 3 minutes. We can sort this out in front of everyone down here, or we can go upstairs and keep this between us. Your choice. Vivian's eye gave the smallest twitch beneath her perfectly applied makeup. I had watched that tell my entire childhood. It meant she already knew something had gone wrong. She just hadn't figured out how wrong yet. "Let her up," she said at last, the words tasting visibly bitter. "We'll address this properly in the room." As the elevator climbed, I heard my father's voice as clearly as if he were standing beside me. "Be patient, Nadia. Everything is already in motion. Just hold on until the moment is right." I had held on. For 6 years, I had held on. The boardroom had not changed at all. Tall windows throwing morning light across a long, dark table. 12 faces arranged in a careful display of authority. The kind of room designed to remind you of your place. Their expressions shifted when I walked in, confusion mixing with curiosity. "This session is closed," Ethan announced loudly, moving toward the head of the table. "Security will be here in just a moment to—" Actually, I said, pulling out the chair at the far end and sitting down without invitation, I think you'll find I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. A majority shareholder tends to have a seat at the table, don't you think? The silence that fell over that room was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Ethan stood completely still, his expression caught somewhere between rage and disbelief. Vivian gripped the back of her chair hard enough that her knuckles went pale. "This is completely baseless," she said at last. "Ethan, get legal on the phone immediately." I opened my portfolio case and set a thick bound document in the center of the table, the company emblem pressed into the cover. "Already taken care of. Your legal team received the full documentation 90 minutes ago. I believe Mr. Calloway should be joining us any second now." The boardroom door opened right on cue. Gerald Calloway, the company's senior legal counsel and a fixture of this firm for nearly 2 decades, walked in wearing an expression I had never seen on him before. Careful, almost subdued. He gave me a measured nod. "I've reviewed everything," he said, addressing the room. "The documents are entirely valid. Over the course of the last 6 years, through a layered series of investment vehicles and proxy arrangements, Ms. Reeves has acquired a controlling stake in Harrington Enterprises." Ethan's palm hit the table. "That is impossible. We have oversight on every significant transaction. Board approval is required." "Not," I said, "when each individual acquisition falls just beneath the mandatory disclosure threshold. Each holding company bought in carefully, quietly, and legally. As of this morning, all of them transferred their combined stakes to Reeves Capital Partners." Vivian lowered herself slowly into her chair, as though her legs had stopped trusting her. "How much?" she asked, her voice stripped of its usual command. 73%, I said. "Effective immediately, I hold majority ownership of Harrington Enterprises." The executives around the table exchanged glances. These were not neutral observers. Every single one of them owed their position to Vivian's favor, placed carefully over the years like chess pieces on a board she thought she controlled forever. "My father built this company," Ethan said, his voice cracking at the edges with something raw. "You have no right to any of this." "Our father," I corrected quietly, "built this company. Or did you forget that he was at the helm before the two of you spent years making sure he wasn't?" The truth settled into the room like a stone dropping into still water. Everyone seated there knew the story, knew how Vivian had moved through my father's life and through this company with the same practiced patience, nudging him aside, reshaping the succession, making Ethan the center of everything, while my father faded to the margins of his own legacy. "Mr. Calloway," I continued, "please distribute the restructuring documents." As the packets circulated around the table, Ethan's color drained steadily. New board composition, revised leadership structure, updated ownership on every line. "You cannot do this," Vivian whispered, but the authority had gone out of her voice entirely. "Can't I?" I pulled up the company's financial records on the screen behind me. "Should we talk about what the accounting has looked like under your management? The offshore holdings, the consulting invoices paid to firms registered to your sister's husband?" Several board members became suddenly fascinated by the documents in front of them, carefully avoiding Vivian's gaze. "Or," I continued, "we could discuss what actually happened to my father's shares following his death. The ones that were apparently liquidated to cover estate obligations." Ethan reached for his water glass with a hand that was not entirely steady. He knew exactly what trail I had followed to get here, the altered paperwork, the transfers that had been buried in layers of bureaucratic noise. "Every one of those transactions was handled through proper legal channels," he said. "Was it?" I let the question sit in the air between us. The financial regulators seem to have some questions about that. They've been particularly thorough in reviewing the last 8 years of activity here. The threat did not need to be louder than that. Vivian's empire had been constructed over decades, and the people in this room had watched it happen. Some of them helped. Now they could feel the floor beginning to shift. "The decision in front of you is straightforward," I said, standing to address the board directly. "We move through this transition with professionalism, or we invite federal oversight to move through it for us. I'd recommend the first option." My phone vibrated quietly on the table. A message from my team. "Everything is staged and ready." "You have 5 minutes," I said. "Make a decision you can live with." The clock on the wall marked every second of that silence while Vivian and Ethan looked at each other with the specific panic of people who have run out of moves. What followed was methodical and absolute. While my auditors and security specialists moved through the building's offices floor by floor, I walked the board through 6 years of documented evidence with the measured calm of someone who had rehearsed this in the dark for a very long time. 8 years of coordinated fraud, I said, advancing through each slide without hurry. Unauthorized transfers, manipulated votes, and the circumstances surrounding my father's death, which were never adequately explained. Ethan's face moved through several colors before settling on something close to gray. I can substantiate all of it, I said, including the meeting you had with my father the night before he was admitted to the hospital. Vivian came to her feet so abruptly her chair scraped back against the floor. You are making allegations that you have absolutely no foundation for. Look at the screen, I said simply. The security footage filled the display. Ethan entering my father's private office at 11:20 on a Tuesday night, the timestamp clear, the camera angle unmistakable. The camera they believed had been disconnected for years had been quietly writing to a secondary archive the entire time. The conversation he had with my father that evening, I said, has been of significant interest to investigators, particularly the portion where he was told to step down from his remaining board positions or face exposure. The board members stared. Ethan's mouth moved without producing sound. Modern forensic toxicology is remarkable, I continued. The things it can identify in preserved samples, even years after the fact, would genuinely surprise you. Vivian opened her mouth and Calloway cut her off before a single word landed. I strongly advise complete silence without your personal attorney present, he said firmly. I thought of every night I had spent in a spare room somewhere, surrounded by files and cold coffee, building this case line by line. The investigators waiting in the lobby, I said, would like to begin reviewing the offshore transaction history at your earliest convenience. The room came apart all at once. Board members peeled away from Vivian's side with visible relief, suddenly eager to demonstrate their willingness to cooperate. This is not only about who holds the shares, I said over the noise. This is about what was taken from my father, from the people who worked in this building and trusted its leadership, from every investor who believed in what this company was supposed to stand for. My phone buzzed. The message from my security lead. We're ready on your word. Ethan made a move toward the door. He didn't make it far. As he was guided out of the room, I saw something in his face I had never seen before, the recognition that the end had finally caught up to him. Vivian did not move. She sat in her chair as though the act of remaining still could hold the world in place around her. You planned every piece of this, she said quietly. I had a good teacher, I replied. You spent years showing me exactly how to be patient, how to wait, how to position things so that when the moment came, it was already over before anyone realized it had begun. The board members still in the room looked at me the way people look at something they cannot quite categorize. They had come in that morning expecting an ordinary quarterly session. They were leaving having watched an entire order collapse. As of right now, I told them, Harrington Enterprises is under new ownership and new leadership. Everyone who cooperates with the ongoing investigation will be treated with fairness. Those who do not. I glanced once at the empty chair where Vivian had been sitting. The blue and red lights were already moving across the windows from the street below. 6 years. 6 years of building in silence, of letting them believe I had simply walked away, of playing the role of the forgotten stepdaughter while the real work happened out of their sight entirely. And still, this was not the ending. It was only the close of the first chapter. The weeks that followed rearranged everything. The press called it a corporate earthquake. Inside the building, it felt more like excavation, pulling up the ground layer by layer to see what had been buried beneath. Ethan and Vivian's arrests generated the kind of coverage that kept scrolling for days. The headline that hit hardest was the one about my father. Death of founder now classified as suspicious, investigation ongoing. Sitting behind his old desk, in the office that was now mine, I read through forensic audit reports that arrived in batches. Every page added another detail to a picture I had been assembling in my mind since the morning they told me he was gone. Miss Reeves, my assistant's voice came through quietly. The remaining board members have arrived. I straightened the photograph on the corner of the desk, the one of my father at the ribbon cutting for this building, smiling with his whole face. It was the only personal item I had brought in. Send them in. They were a different group of people than they had been 3 weeks ago. Quieter, more careful with their words and their posture. Federal scrutiny had a way of dissolving confidence that had never been genuinely earned. Thank you all for being here, I said, and noted how each of them leaned slightly forward. We're going to be discussing the future of this company today. Going forward, Harrington Enterprises will be operating under a new name, Reeves Group. A murmur moved around the table. The name carried weight I intended it to carry. The preliminary review has confirmed that several of you had direct knowledge of what was happening under the previous leadership, I said. Some of you did more than simply know. One of them began to speak. I stopped him before he could frame it as a defense. I'm not interested in explanations. I'm interested in accountability and in what comes next. By the close of business today, each of you will either submit your formal resignation or provide documented evidence of your cooperation with the federal inquiry. Take that seriously. As they filed out, a message arrived from the facility where Ethan was being held. He was requesting a conversation. I deleted it without replying. There was nothing left between us that needed to be said. That evening, after the day team had gone, Calloway came in carrying a sealed envelope. He set it on the desk and sat down across from me. The toxicology analysis is final, he said. Your father was poisoned. First-degree murder has been added to the charges. I did not speak for a moment. I had expected this answer for 6 years, and still hearing it said plainly, felt like something shifting inside my chest. Not breaking, just finally settling into its true shape. And Vivian? She gave a full statement this morning, he said. She's attributing the entirety of it to Ethan. Of course she had. Vivian had always been a woman who survived by deciding quickly who was expendable. Even her own son, apparently, was not beyond that calculation. The next morning, I gathered every person who worked in that building, from the executives on the upper floors to the woman who restocked the supply rooms every Tuesday. I stood at the front of the auditorium and looked out at all of them. This company was created on a foundation of principles my father believed in deeply, I began. Those principles were stolen from this place by people who chose their own enrichment over everything else. Today we start putting them back. I laid out what was changing, a restructured benefits program, a formal ethics policy with teeth, and a profit-sharing model that would make every person in that room a genuine stakeholder in what we built going forward. And we are establishing the Thomas Reeves Foundation for Corporate Accountability, I said, funded entirely through the assets recovered from offshore accounts. Its purpose is to investigate what happens when people in power decide the rules no longer apply to them. The sound that filled the room after that was the kind you don't forget. Later, when the building had emptied, I sat for a moment at my father's desk and opened the bottom drawer to clear it out. Inside was a small photo book with a worn cover. I opened it to the middle and found a picture I had never seen before. The two of us at my university graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something just out of frame, before Vivian, before Ethan, before everything that came after. I held it for a long time. You were right, I said softly into the quiet room. You told me patience was the only way. You were right. Vivian's attorney called that night offering testimony against Ethan in exchange for consideration. I texted back 2 words and put my phone face down on the desk. Let them. The city outside the window was lit up in every direction. Tomorrow's schedule was full. New board appointments, compliance structures, the launch of the company's first ethically chartered investment division. Ethan had stood in that lobby and told me the shareholder meeting was not for people like me. He had no idea that the girl he sent away would come back holding the deed to everything he thought was his. Sometimes the truest justice is not in taking back what was stolen. It is in building something so undeniable from the wreckage that they have to watch it rise.